Hello and happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday.
Hope you're having a great one so far. This is the Two Mats Q&A brought to you by the wonderful subscribers of the New European. First question from Leslie in Highgate. If you were writing the briefing notes for Keir Starmer's trip to see Trump in Washington, D.C., what would your top advice be?
Well, don't give away the UK would be top, because
well, not immediately.
There's a lot of handing over of territory going on, and he's such a sort of implacable real estate developer. That would be my kind of bold point number one. But I guess it's going to be a hell of a week, and maybe a week and change in terms of diplomacy, shuttle diplomacy, because Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are sort of vying to be the next up to go to the White House. And at the time of recording, we don't know who's going first, but they will be going this week. And then it looks as though, in fairly short order, there will be a meeting, a face-to-face meeting, probably in Saudi, between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but it is. So amazing. In a way, Starmer and Macron, in the most sort of back of an envelope way conceivable, have to get across to Trump as best they can in their individual meetings the urgency of the situation. I think both of them, and really not many other people, so many other heads of government in Europe so far, are willing to put troops into this so-called reassurance force, which we would call a peacekeeping force. But Starmer talks about a US backstop, which I think means, in the first instance, air cover. And so he'll have to see if any of that is feasible. At this point, I would throw the farm at Trump in terms of all the things that are likely to make him excited, in terms of drilling in the North Sea, in terms of a state visit, in terms of planning, speeding up for more golf courses than you can imagine. You know, this is a moment. This is a highly transactional president, and this is a good moment to offer it. Now, what comes out of it will be blah, but behind the scenes, he has an opportunity, if he's equal to it, to express how seriously this is being taken this side of the Atlantic. And it's the biggest challenge by far so far of Starmer's premiership.
I agree with everything you've just said. I think that the thing about Keir Starmer's visit is that what Keir Starmer needs to understand and to be relaxed about is that everybody knows you've got to play a game with Trump. So I wouldn't be worried about seeming in that public thing where they're sitting in the Oval Office by the fire.
He can be fine. He can
nod along and be polite. And but the thing that I think Starmer's got to keep in mind is what is Trump's motivation? Trump is the deal maker. He wants to be seen to be doing great deals. He wants a legacy. He wants a very positive legacy. And if I was Keir Starmer, once the doors are shut and everybody pisses off and I'm there alone with him, I'd give him a history lesson. And I'd talk to him about Neville Chamberlain. And I'd say, don't forget when Neville Chamberlain came back from Munich, waving his piece of paper, everybody cheered, everybody acclaimed, everybody said what a wonderful piece of politics that was. And in very short order, it unravelled, and Neville Chamberlain's name is stained evermore.
Yeah, and he likes being compared to Churchill rather than Chamberlain.
Exactly. So be Churchill, not Chamberlain.
And the other person he hates being compared to is Biden.
Yeah.
And Starmer might, with profit, point out to Trump that the problem with this sort of situation is, at the moment, Trump, he's only just passed his 1 month mark in office. It's amazing.
I know, people talk about 100 hours in his case.
Unbelievable. The sheer pace of it has been incredible. So at the moment, he's got all the energy. But if this falls to pieces, and it might, I mean, it's quite possible that Zelensky will just walk away and Ukraine will carry on in a sort of ghastly, and one dreads to think of what it would be like, guerrilla war. And the problem then is that Trump owns that. And it would be worth reminding him that Biden's poll ratings started to tank after the retreat from Kabul. Not because Americans are hugely invested in Kabul or the fate of Afghanistan, but because it made America look and seem weak. And it was weak. And I think that Starmer could And I'm sure he'll be advised by his national security advisor, Jonathan Powell, who's very experienced and was in the Blair government. Be careful, Mr. President, because what looks now as like a straightforward, I'm in a deal with Putin, Ukraine can go whistle, might not look like that a year and a half from now.
Yeah.
And, he's got midterms in 2026, and he's got a lot of things he wants to do domestically. So just a little bit of, plain speaking from Starmer would not go amiss. It's not in his nature to be that blunt.
No, but I think he's going to have to. He's going to have to step up to the plate on that. Leslie from Highgate, great question. Thank you.
Theo from Winchester asks, I noticed that Jordan Peterson's alt-right group, the so-called Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, had a big shindig in London this week, actually last week now, with some box office names. Do the Mats agree with me that progressives need to get their act together with similar networks and events? It sometimes feels like we leave the field clear for the right. Thanks, Theo. What do you reckon, Matt?
Well, I mean, it was, if you're... they call it ARC, don't they?
ARC,
the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, but ARC, which has got all sorts of biblical kind of connotations.
Yes, it's a bit of a euphemism, isn't it, really?
Escape the deluge of progressive politics. It was impressive.
The lineup
was, if you're into that kind of stuff,
Vance,
it was
Peterson,
like
Douglas Murray.
Band-Aid for the far right.
It was sort of Woodstock for fascists.
It really Woodstock for fascists. It was a rally and very impressive guest list. And I think Theo is absolutely right. And obviously, when I read the question, I was thinking, shit, this is something the New Europeans should be leading.
It is,
we should put together. It does illustrate a problem where on the progressive centre-left side of politics, there are fewer stellar standout stars, that can excite people to that degree.
And also, I think that one thing that the progressive side of the street has lost, it has had in the past, but it has lost, is the talent for performance. So you remember that, how could we forget the night we went to Jordan Peterson at the O2?
Amazing night.
Now, if nothing else, it was spectacular showbiz, wasn't it? I think we were having Vietnam flashbacks to this day about it. Yeah. But what they do very well, the sort of MAGA piece in America and their allies on this side of the Atlantic, is they put on a good show.
Yeah.
And what I find, there are numerous worthy seminars and associative meetings and meetings of identity politics affinity groups on the left that go on every weekend. Yeah. But what none of them have is that kind of cut through where you think, wow, that was really well put together. I mean, the only example I can think of is that the Blair Institute has done a few events which have kind of tried to do that.
Right.
But there's no equivalent of ARC or the National Conservatism group on the left, which is insane when you think of what you could put together. And of course, the answer to the excellent question you posed, Matt, about there not being stars is that you make stars. The people that are stars now at the Peterson gig, including Peterson, have been made stars by podcasting, by public appearances. Douglas Murray, who's now a sort of global figure. Used to, when I was editing Spectator, he used to be a sort of very affable contributor, right? I mean, and likable, to be honest. But I would never have predicted that he would have become this kind of star turn. And to be sort of just straightforwardly empirical about it, he's done by career planning. He has made his way through the American podcast ecosphere. Done a lot of TV all over the world. Attached himself to issues like Israel and morality, and
he's been bold about it.
And he's gone out on the branch, and as a result, they absolutely love him. He's box office.
Because what people don't appreciate is that you get anybody sticking their neck out in any contentious agenda has to deal with an awful lot of shit. As a consequence. You've dealt with it. I've dealt with it. Douglas Murray, for sure, deals with it all the time.
All these people have security.
Whether you're on the right, the left, or in the middle, and you say stuff that is about a debate that's contentious, you're
in trouble.
A lot of shit to deal with. And so, in some regard, I think even if I disagree with everything they say, and I do, it's commendable that they are bold enough to say it, right? That's where I'll draw the line. Where the failing is you can't say shut up to them. You've got to counter it. And what I wonder, actually, whether what we really need is not just a sort of progressive version of the ARC convention, but some kind of meeting where you get Matt D'Ancona versus Douglas Murray. Okay, sit down for an hour, argue it out. Where we're not all just talking and nodding along to each other. With that Jordan Peterson thing we saw, there were basically 5 people violently agreeing with each other and trying to outdo each other as to how kind of hostile.
Yeah, and I mean, apart from us, as far as I could work out, it was like a revivalist meeting.
It really was. It had that religious kind of.
I thought, oh God, if we don't clap, they might kill us.
But imagine if you had, the equivalent of, Douglas Murray and, like my favourite things used to be Gore Vidal versus William H. Buckley.
Yeah, or Hitchens versus A.N. Christian.
Exactly. Exactly. Or anybody.
Anybody,
But something where people can sit down and see the arguments play out. Because it's actually a human tendency to listen to stuff and say, I agree with a bit of that.
One thing, exactly. But actually, and I think we're coming out, thankfully, of that terrible period. But there has been a really bad tendency on the progressive side for the last sort of 5 to 10 years to precisely avoid what you're saying, which is to say there's no debate, we know what's right, we're on the right side of history. Why would I talk to Douglas Murray? Why would I talk to Konstantin Kisin? And they've cleaned up because they do have people on their podcasts that don't necessarily agree with them. So they look open-minded, and our side looks insulated, smug, weak. And that's a real problem.
And I think,
but it's easily corrected.
I think it's the middle of those 3 qualities, smugness, that gets right up people's noses.
Smugness, in a way, explains most of the politics of the last 10 years.
I think that's absolutely right.
It really does.
It's, in fact, there's a great book to be written called Smug.
The modern, Smug.
Right. That's my idea. I've patented it.
It's yours.
I'm going to write that. Right. Next question, please. From driver Andy. No coup, and he says, and that's what's unfolding in the States, has ever been successful without neutering opposition in the press. The legacy press and their billionaire owners are bending over backwards to normalise Trump, so no real reason to attack them. But do you think Trump and co will move onto other voices like Midas, Robert Reich and the Contrarian, who are vociferously critical and are gaining huge online audiences? And what would you do at the New European if a populist tried to muzzle you?
It's a really good question, this. And it's really topical. I mean, just for people who don't know the platforms that Andy's mentioned, Midas is a very good left-wing media company. Robert Reich was Labour Secretary under Clinton, and he does a very good Substack, and he also writes regularly for The Guardian. The Contrarian is a new and another very good Substack by one of the exiles from the sadly depleted Washington Post, Jen Rubin, and a never-Trumper called Norma Eisen. And he's right, they're sort of leading the charge, along with other groups like the Bullock and Pod Save America and so on, against Trump's second term. But I think the question he poses, I mean, yes, lots of the owners, the owner of the LA Times and Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post, are preemptively obeying. But there's also some very alarming signs, not only in lawsuits against various broadcasting companies, but also, it's a little case study. I think we've mentioned it briefly before, is that the Associated Press has been kept away from the White House and from Air Force One and even from Mar-a-Lago press conferences because it refuses to call the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America. Now, the reason that's an important case study is that back in 2009, and this, sorry to get into the weeds a bit in this, but it does illustrate the point very well. The Obama White House tried to exclude, on one occasion, Fox from talking to an executive pay czar called Kenneth Feinberg, right? That just one attempt to freeze Fox out. And the rest of the press pack in DC went ballistic. CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC. We won't put up with this. And Obama's White House backed down.
Quite right.
As you would expect. Now, the difference this time is although the White House, I think it's called the Press Correspondents Association or whatever, has written a couple of stern letters, no one is talking about a boycott or taking any measures. And so there's that sort of exhausted obedience that is one of the first signs of an incipient authoritarianism that makes me really worry.
Yeah. And to answer you,
that question's one for you, really, Matt.
The last question: what would we do if a populist tried to muzzle you? Is I would open the champagne. I love it when that shit tries to happen because it positions us perfectly. When Michelle Mone wrote in and said, we're going to sue you, we called her out on that, and we'll sue you, and we absolutely don't take any truck from these losers,
I'm so glad to you say that, because I was thinking about, it's obviously your call, but my feeling is that if you get into this game, and you know that it's a very remote possibility because we take democracy for granted, right?
Yeah.
And we shouldn't. But you shouldn't be a journalist if at the end of the day you're not willing to go to jail to protect the source, to push back against it. Now, is that a clear and present danger? No, it's not.
Yeah.
But reforms ahead in the polls. The roadmap, as a word much loved of Labour, towards something unpleasant in this country is now not inconceivable. So it's at minimum, it's a question we all have to ask ourselves.
Well, Matt, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate the importance of this moment, but Boris Johnson once phoned, or his press secretary phoned me up at home at 10 o'clock at night and said, Boris Johnson's going to sue you for defamation. He's the sitting Prime Minister.
Yep.
Over something we'd written that was a reported remark he'd made about his wife. So I had the threat of a sitting Prime Minister suing me personally for defamation. Now, if that wasn't an attempt to put the frighteners on the New Europe, what did I do? I told him to go and fuck himself.
Which was the right answer.
And then published on Twitter the transcript of what had happened. And I had all the text messages from this hapless PR guy.
Excellent.
So, there's absolutely no question. The problem arises when you get these very wealthy individuals like Michelle Mone and Doug Barrowman, or, other people with huge resources who decide to go after you through the courts, and you're a small organisation.
Starts to...
Well, you're sitting there and you have to make the calculation.
You have to make the call.
As we did with Michelle Mone, she could bankrupt us.
Yeah.
Do we allow that to pass? No, we don't. She can go fuck herself. That was the very short assessment that I made in my head, and I'm glad I did, and I'd do it next time.
The other thing that you'll see in America is that if Kash Patel, who's Maniac, becomes director of the FBI, and with Pam Bondi as Attorney General, both of them total MAGA maniacs, the power of the justice system and the FBI, particularly with the IRS, to make people's lives a misery, even if there's no prospect of a conviction or even a prosecution, they can make your life a misery.
What do they call it when you have to? It's not an investigation, but
grand jury or
when they go through your tax affairs and
an audit, I guess.
An audit. That's the word, and that can be crippling for people.
Yes, I mean it can ruin people's lives for literally decades. Because they go through everything, and of course now with digital records, everything is a lot, and so I worry about that as well, which is that the menace that there'll be people will have whispered in their ears. In the States, journalists who are investigating, I'll be ashamed if the IRS had a look at your tax.
It's also, just to broaden the point out about independence of media, it's one of the reasons we take very few, if any, adverts is that we will never allow a commercial partner to influence the direction of our journalism.
Yes.
And we are about alone in that game in the UK.
Yeah.
And the money that is coming in from the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia, from all sorts of vested, obvious political interests. I think I'm right in saying that the Independent has got a big ownership stake from Saudi investment funds. So when you look at these so-called independent mainstream publishers, they are anything but.
Absolutely.
Let's take a quick break on that note of high pontification. We'll come back in a moment.
Like a scene from Conclave.
Welcome back, dear listeners. I hope you're having a great morning.
Roy, you talked about Greater USA, Russia and China, but you didn't mention India. I think we have mentioned India, but anyway, not in that, perhaps that conversation. Surely in this new world of spheres of influence / control, they will play a big role. India's population, economy, tech and military are just getting bigger. They're on an upwards trajectory, and I'm not sure you can say that about the other three. No way Modi won't want a seat at the new Yalta. Very true. What do you reckon, Matt?
Well, I think it is true. And, the BRIC nations are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa has been added at China's behest. These are all nations that are going to be influencing our lives here on this very small island for decades, generations to come.
And he's an authoritarian, so Trump likes him and Putin likes him, and he stays quite equidistant between the various strongman powers, Modi, and he's very happy to use violence. He's also very often forgotten. I mean, not only is India's economy growing very fast, but it's got nukes.
Yeah. And a space program. Which is becoming increasingly relevant.
So I think it'll get harder and harder to exclude, not just from the new Yalta, whatever that is, but from the Security Council, actually.
Yeah. I do think the question, Roy's very good question, does illustrate the kind of fallacy of our simplistic thinking of how the world works, that we divide.
And world is the operative word.
Yeah.
It really is. It really is. Because, I mean, it is easy. I mean, Roy's right in the sort of spirit of his charge, which is that it's easy when you're sort of agonising about, what Macron is wearing, to forget where the real action is, and easy. I noticed that very good example, actually, the AI conference summit in Paris, which Vance came over to, and was co-hosted by Macron and Modi. Yeah. And very few of the reports mentioned the fact that Modi was the co-host, but it was very significant that.
And they will not notice that.
And they will not notice that, exactly.
Yeah. Question from Nick. What do you make of Boris Johnson's silence on matters Ukraine these past few weeks? Deafening, no? Big fan of Trump, but also Ukraine's self-proclaimed supporter. He's in a slight spot, I suspect.
Yaru. He is actually. He broke his silence. He's broken his silence a few moments. On Wednesday he tweeted on X after all of the things that Trump had said. A classic Johnsonian attempt at cakeism, because he wants Ukraine to win, but also Trump to be right.
Yeah. And
it's one of those occasions where cakeism is not possible. But he said that what Trump had been saying, it was all Ukraine's fault that they'd been invaded. They basically asked to be invaded. And
could have said no.
Yeah, could have said no. And I mean, they've been there for 3 years. I mean, they've done nothing. I said, wow. But Boris said that, and I love this. This is sort of classic Johnson nonsense. He said that for some reason, he said, and I'm quoting, that what Trump said are not intended to be historically accurate, but to shock Europeans into action. Now, this is revealing on any number of levels, right? Talk about projection, right? But exactly. He says, of course, Ukraine didn't start the war. You might as well say that America attacked Japan at Pearl Harbor.
I thought that was great.
Agreed, but that Trump did say, that they'd started the war. And he says, of course, a country undergoing a violent invasion should not be staging elections. There was no general election in the UK from 1935 to 1945. Yeah, but Trump said that Zelensky was a dictator because he hadn't held an election. And of course, Zelensky's ratings are not 4%. But he did say they were 4%. And on it goes. And so I was just sort of chasing it back. And I think he got himself into a quagmire of his own creation about July, because he was very excited by Trump's escape from the assassination in Butler, and he wrote a long piece in the Mail about how he talked to Trump after the assassination attempt, and I am more convinced than ever that he has the strength and the bravery to fix it, to save Ukraine, to bring peace, and to stop the disastrous contagion of conflict. I believe that Trump can end it on the right terms for Ukraine and the West. He even bought, if Trump had been in the White House, I don't think Putin would have been so reckless and criminal as to invade Ukraine. Donald Trump can see the risk that a defeat for Ukraine would exact a huge long-term cost in America and the world. Well, he was at the inauguration, and he wrote a report on that and said, in answer to the question, would Trump betray Ukraine? I remain firmly among the optimists. Now, I'm afraid we've been talking a lot about you mentioned it on Thursday's pod, the Mike Tyson quote about having a plan until you get punched in the face. I think that Boris has been punched in the face by geopolitical reality. And the two things he wants to be true simply cannot be true.
Yeah. It was a sterling effort to try and rationalise his bullshit, but it was. You're so right that Johnson is projecting there. Because basically his argument is
why are you taking him seriously?
He's lying. So what?
So what?
Yeah. Great.
He doesn't mean it, but also he doesn't mean it. And you Europeans, should know that. And you are the problem.
That's right.
Which is extraordinary.
Brother from another mother. Next question, please.
You rightly praise Andy Burnham, who I am a huge fan of. So are we. But you're forgetting that Starmer promised further devolution and empowerment of the Metro mayors. This is not to take away from Burnham at all, but you never give Starmer any credit at all. He doesn't seek the limelight, but maybe that's his mistake in this day and age. Berlin Emma on Spotify. Matt.
We ever don't give Starmer credit, do we?
No, we had an absolutely civil discussion about whether or not he was audacious only the other day.
Yeah, although I think audacity maybe
improving evanescent, right. As they say.
That audacity faded rapidly. But I'd forgotten about Starmer's promise around devolution and metro mayors.
Yeah, and there was a bit in the budget, I think, of she gave a sort of integrated settlement. I love all these ways they describe it, which are guaranteed not to stick in the memory.
Yeah, exactly.
It's one of this government's talents is to take ideas which are very good and we need a way of describing it that voters won't remember. Yeah. Right? Integrated settlement. That's it.
But I mean, if and when he does, I think it's only a good thing. I think Andy. By the way, some breaking news: Andy is joining us on the podcast on
tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah, he's coming on tomorrow. So got him.
We'll be able to talk about all this with the man himself.
A deep dive into the Convention of the North, I think it's called, where they're going to be discussing how to generate, make George Osborne's dream of
the man who was almost in the Stone Roses in his
northern
own view
diddle come true. So Andy,
I met him at a Stone Roses gig once.
Who, George Osborne?
No, Andy.
Andy Burnham. Yeah.
No, he's a proper fan.
Oh, he's a Scouser running Manchester. I mean, that's worth it just for that sentence alone.
I think. Well, here's a sort of to give a kind of circularity to this episode of the pod. I would personally feel a lot happier if Mr. Andy Burnham was going to Washington this week.
Oh, not to talk about Manchester, but to talk about...
Well, I mean, I'm delighted
things.
that he's a Metro mayor because he's performed the role with distinction. Yeah. But I have to say that, when we talk about the quality of the talent of performance, the quality of presence...
Yeah.
And someone who's, more to the point, he's grown as a politician.
Well, that is the thing. And that's where I think maybe the greatest legacy of metro mayors and devolution in cities is that it allows politicians a training ground.
Yes. Unfortunately, one of them was...
I mean, yes. So, yes.
But you're right.
Boris
100%.
Boris is on the far side of that. But look, I mean, let's give Boris Johnson his credit. If his career had stopped as mayor of London...
It would be a disaster.
Then, well, we'd say, well, he did interesting things in London as the mayor of London.
And Andy Street in Birmingham was by far the sanest Conservative politician in the country by a country mile.
Yeah.
And, I hope he's not finished with politics because he's literally the only one I can think of who would do a good job. But I think you're right. I mean, it's a bit like governors becoming presidents, isn't it? There's that sense of having had executive training rather than just having been an MP and then maybe a shadow portfolio. You've actually
had to make a decision.
You've had to run things that people care about. That's the other thing I think that makes mayors very, very good prospective national level politicians is that they've had to do the wheelie bins, they've had to do the fire service, they've had to do the police. They really know about proper retail politics on the pavement.
Yeah, and by definition, Andy Burnham has experienced half of the country that Westminster seems to forget about, which is the north.
I think that is one of the most amazing things about this government is that they do appear to have sort of forgotten about the north. Yeah, I mean that's a big generalisation, and I'm sure Angela Rayner, if she were here, would hit me with a pointed stick. But she isn't, so she can't. And I'm surprise. And there's been a couple of the last Reeves sort of we're going to re-energise the British economy announcement speech was it was conspicuously southeast.
It definitely was. Some things never change. So yeah, tune in tomorrow evening and listen to Andy and
dispensing wisdom.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of it. Bolin Emma or Emma Bolin from Spotify. Thank you. You had the privilege of being this
Bolin Anne.
Anne Bolin. You had the privilege of being
arrogant of Catherine.
Last question. Send in your questions to 2mats@tnepublishing.com. We always look forward to hearing any feedback you may have, good or bad. Do subscribe to the New European from just £1 a week.
Just
and it is just £1. It's not
if any of you haven't yet, what? I mean, why?
It's a quid, right?
Send us an email, explain why.
I think of the sofa,
we've got to the point now where, I'm thinking, if you haven't, why?
Well, that's right, yeah. I want to know, actually, that's a very good thing. If you haven't subscribed to the New European, given that it's just £1, I want to know why.
You've let yourself down, you've let your postcode down, and worst of all, you've let the school down.
You absolutely have. Thanks as ever to our production team led by Matt Hill from Rethink Audio. And until tomorrow evening,
have a great day.
Have a great day.